Hi everyone, Lisa Haven here, and I've got a bombshell surfacing out of the World Economic Forum. Now, if you don't know who the World Economic Forum is, they are a globalist cabal. They are attempting to usher the world into a new world order or an international order, which is the new name that many globalists are starting to call it. But either way you look at it, it is your new world order. Now, every year they put out different reports, and I go over them in detail, but this is probably the one that dropped my jaw to the floor among all the others. This one is huge because in it, they actually give us 3 different scenarios of how they believe the future of the world and what the future of the world will look like. But don't take my word for it. I'm going to pull up the source for you right here on the screen, and I'm going to keep it side by side so we can kind of go through this together so you get the idea. But you can see it's titled Future Scenarios and Implications for the Industry. And you can see those 3 pictures on the front, which I'm going to go through in a moment, but it's those pictures that portray different scenarios in which your future could look like. And they say that, well, it could or could not look like that. They say it might be one of 3. It could be a merger of all 3. And that's kind of the general consensus that they take on it. But now, let me give you kind of an executive summary. Here's what they have to say there. The IU industry can no longer afford to stand still. Global megatrends such as climate change, resource scarcity, demographic shifts, and automation and digitalization are affecting economies, governments, and society at large. Players along the IU value chain need to prepare strategically and make the right moves to thrive amid the disruptions these trends could cause. It goes on. The next section there, the initiative used scenario planning, this is what this report is, to analyze how multiple present-day megatrends could lead to different versions of a future world. So based off of some of the problems that we're having, here are our 3 world scenarios in which we can live. Now, what I want to do is go through each one of these in detail and briefly so you get the overall idea. But the first one is building in a virtual world. I'm going to give you, you can see the picture on the screen, but I'm going to give you a breakdown of what they say it is and then my analysis. So here's what they say. In this version of the virtual world future, which I believe is the government-run future, they say there's decades of harmonious economic conditions and successful research collaborations between universities, research centers, and companies who pave the way for major advancements in robotics and artificial intelligence. Automation and robots, connected systems, and cloud technology permeate daily life and industries of all kinds. AI applications and other technologies that get smarter, the more they are used, are fueling that economic growth. Intelligent system and robots replace manual labor. It goes on. Strong economies allow governments to offer citizens comfortable basic income. This is UBI, Universal Basic Income. And I'll explain that in a moment, but before I do, let me just finish here. People shop and go to school virtually. No more face-to-face contact there. They have abundant free time and spend it doing leisure activities. This sounds great, right? Volunteering and traveling, creating the needs for large passenger transportation hubs, planes, drones, robot taxis, hyperloops, and other things are connected by means of transportation to get people where they go. And it goes on this global cooperation is strong in this way. But let me say universal basic income. For those of you who may not know, kind of in a nutshell, what that is taking money from those who have a job, from those who are working, and via our tax dollars, taking big chunks out in the tax dollars, and the government saying, we're going to give that money, no strings attached, to anyone who basically ask for it. You don't have a job, here you go. You aren't working, here you go. But the problem is, when it's a free handout like that, nobody's gonna work. Because if you're taking my pay, it's just that whole socialism mentality that they're attempting to push. But this is what they're promoting as a good thing in this world. In the end, everybody ends up poor. That is the way socialism works. That is what UBI will lead to. Now, aside from that, let me talk about this picture, and I'm trying not to go too long because this report is huge, but you can see in this photo on the screen here, it's all led by a government. You see government right there at the top. It's the upper right-hand corner with a globe next to it, government rule. And then if you look at the picture in detail, you see machines running literally everything. Your cars are self-driving cars, which means human has been taken out of the picture, and it's all controlled by these machines, the machine doing the manual labor there. You see people at the zoo, so all this leisure activity that they're supposing everybody has, and then all the work being done by robots. Why? Because we're living on UBI, Universal Basic Income, basically your handout. But that's never going to be the picture that is actually portrayed. It's a bunch of poor people striving to get by because it never pans out right. And in addition to that, you can see government is the god, there's surveillance, there's drones flying around, and everything is really along that virtual environment, if you will. But I call this a government controlled environment. That's just scenario one. Scenario two, they get a little bit into more detail, and this scenario I'm going to call corporate run, and they call this factories run the world. This is their factory scenario. And here's what it says. It says several decades after the 2007 and 2008 economic downturn, we went through that, right? A new global financial crisis hits that is even more devastating. Is that a hint at something in the future? I'm not quite sure, but this is their scenario anyway. It goes on, in its wake, governments struggled to cope with the huge debts incurred during the meltdown. Cyber criminals take advantage of the situation to increase the volume and severity of attacks on public and private data networks. The inability of governments to solve debt problems and counter cyber attacks in a timely manner erodes public trust. So private industry gradually assumes tasks that were once the sole purview of the public sector, including providing infrastructure, defense, and public education, all now on the private sector. It goes on, with the blessing of government agencies, corporations apply business principles to many issues confronting society. It goes on, gradually fruitful financial times return, nations' new profit motive spurs the broad adoption of lean principles as well as technological advancements, especially in manufacturing. The new social order that prioritizes profits and leads to global prosperity, but it has negative implications for the environment and some social groups, yada yada. Scarce resources are further depleted, unskilled workers lose their job to automation, and employ people for cheap labor. This is their scenario two. And as you can see here, you can see massive amounts of pollution in the air. According to them there, they have all their machines running everything, evil eyes and evil corporations running the world. And this is the one they paint in the worst light. But this is one way that they say it could go. You could see zero defects since 4,752 days. But you have people and robots working together kind of in this one. But that is the overall agenda, and you can see some chaos actually break out in that one. Now, the third one, and one of the most shocking ones, I believe, is a green reboot. This is the New World Order 1. This 100% is your globalist running the world. And this is the one that they put at the front and center because this is the one they're all rooting for. Here's what they have to say. Keep in mind, this is a new document and the United Nations, things like the UN already exist, right? Okay, in this future world, decades-long neglect of climate change and dwindling natural resources devastate the planet. A group of powerful countries take action. Sounds a bit biblical. Powerful countries take action after recognizing that any further deterioration of natural resources threatens humanity. So it kind of sounds like in the Bible, it talks about 10 nations coming together to rule the world. Well, could this be some kind of 10-nation gathering that comes together to save the planet? Save the planet from a problem they themselves created and then offer a solution to the problem they created. Right, okay, goes on. They form the United Sustainable Nations. You mean like the UN Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 now? Right. It goes on. They create the United Sustainable Nations to halt overuse of scarce resources, stop natural catastrophes triggered by climate change, and revitalize the environment. The group establishes a global fund to finance sustainability, research, and education, and passes strict global environmental regulations. I mean, you're going to pay some taxes, and some pretty heavy taxes, to these globalist people because they have to have a global fund to save the planet, right? It goes on. Society adopts more eco-friendly practices, moving closer to a circular environmental model. In other words, let's move people more closer together so we have more control. People and companies reuse as much as they can. Recycling becomes mandatory. Online platforms let people share housing, workspace, vehicles, these kinds of things. A little bit further on, it makes a few more bombshell statements. Governments impose strict environmental regulations on construction, including tough limits on waste production and energy and material consumption. A little further down, it talks about their tax system, a UNS tax system. Materials are taxed based on origin, based off if they can be recycled or not as well. And they also use the same sensor data to enforce environmental regulations, which means in this construct of the world, they force you to use things like smart meters, and which they're already forcing us to do, but they can enforce regulations on you using that smart meter or using that smart appliances. They can then regulate you out of house and home. Well, we think you're using too much electricity, so we're cutting you down. We think you're using too much water and not conserving what you need to, so let's cut that down. It's a system wholly and utterly of control. And this is something we need to be very, very leery of. Now, in conclusion, and I'm going to skip kind of to the back end of this, but in conclusion, here's what they had to say, and this is almost towards the end here, but it says, delaying this work, meaning one of these three scenarios, something needs to happen where we, something needs to happen now to get ready for these three scenarios. So they say delaying is not an option. IU decision makers have to act now using changes within their industry. The scenarios describe this whole thing as a wake-up call to think strategically about the future. So this whole thing is, let's think about the future. Which scenario is it going to be? How can your company change to head in one of those directions or all of those directions? Now, in this report, they repeatedly say we're not predicting the future, which is true. They're not predicting the future. They're saying that this is something they believe, kind of an ironic statement there, but this is something they believe could happen in the future. So take it as you will. But one last thing I want to show you is actually in the foreword of the report. And it says this, and I find this fascinating, but it says, in this business, we have experienced a significant reduction in trust, to the point where the 2017 Edelman Trust Barometer reveals that trust is in crisis around the world. Right? Hello? Because you keep lying to us and keep moving us into a new world order direction. What is there to trust? Nothing, really. The dramatic shift is a wake-up call to the infrastructure and urban development industry, IU industry, since trust is the prime enabler of effective collaboration. So in other words, they need to gain your trust to get anywhere near one of these three scenarios, or this is what the world is going to look like. And in order to gain your trust, you can guarantee they're going to brainwash you at your school levels, your television levels. They're already doing it with Agenda 2030, with United Nations Model UN that they put in the schools. It's a program geared at globalizing your child. Please don't put your child in that. And so much more. Anyhow, I'd love to get your thoughts on this bombshell report. Please leave them below. And don't forget to check out my partner at noblegoldinvestments.com. Well, thanks again for tuning in. I'm Lisa Haven, signing out.